Welcome back to the Bionicle Inspiration series. Today, I'm feeling like a Matoran who's just put his Toa stone in the Suva and has transformed into a Toa because I'm feeling refreshed, ready to go, and happy. And speaking of ready and raring to go, let's get ready to go with this episode. Today we're focusing on dragons. Focusing on a whole bunch of different dragon mocks. I didn't really intend to come in with a sort of sub-theme to this dragon mock episode, but to some degree it's more out there dragons, not so much your stereotypical dragons, focusing on a lot of the other different types of dragons or ways that you could approach a dragon that's not so typical. That being said, there are a few typical dragons thrown in here and there, but there's some slight differences to them, and I think that's cool. So let's dive on in, shall we? The first mock we've got today, it is called Balthazar Dragonborn Cleric, and it is by Han.
Anything Han? It's Han, but that's okay.
Oh, no, okay, it's Han Ha. It's by Elemental Hero Shadow. Because I ain't pronouncing that name. Anyway, really cool mark. And it's based on D&D. You're taking one of the other things I love and combining it with the other thing I love, Lego. It's good stuff. It's good stuff. So, of course, this is a Dragonborn character. And if you're not someone who plays D&D and you're like, Dragonborn, that's that thing from Skyrim, right? Well, yeah, kind of, but not really. So I will go to D&D Beyond, the website here, and I'll read a little description on Dragonborns. Born of dragons, as their name proclaims, the Dragonborn walk proudly through a world that greets them with fearful incomprehension. Shaped by draconic gods or the dragons themselves, Dragonborn originally hatched from dragon eggs as a unique race, combining the best attributes of dragons and humanoids. Some Dragonborn are faithful servants to true dragons, others form the ranks of soldiers in great wars, and still others find themselves adrift with no clear calling in life. So it's sort of a little bit of a brief history on Dragonborns, I guess. I bet you weren't expecting to learn about D&D today in this episode, but you did. And so I love the fact that Mr. Elemental Hero Shadow is saying, is building a Dragonborn character. He said this is based off a character he played in D&D, which is awesome. And I love the idea of doing that, building a Dragonborn character, building a more humanoid-style dragon character. And there's some awesome stuff going on here that combines all the awesome attributes of a humanoid character and a dragon. So it's a really interesting, more unique way you could approach a dragon, that's for sure. So some stuff that this mock does and does very well. It uses one of the Ninjago dragon head pieces here, one of the newer ones. It was the smaller gold Ninjago dragon head there. I don't know all the Ninjago lore. You're probably like, Ben, it's called Bob Dragon. I don't know if the dragon has a name in Ninjago lore. I don't know it. My apologies. But regardless, that's a more recent Ninjago piece. You probably can still pick that one up in the set it came in stores. And it works really well here. It's just kind of the right size. That it's not, some of those Ninjago dragon heads can actually be quite large and a little bit more difficult to put into a mock. This one's just a beautiful size here and flows very well with Bionicle pieces and works well. So always make sure to pay attention to some of those Ninjago sets, specifically the Ninjago sets that came with dragon elements, and see how you can implement them into a Bionicle, because like we see here, it works really well. And speaking of implementing things into Bionicle, the torso piece here seems to be using a lot of different Galador pieces there, which is awesome. The Galador stuff here I actually think works really well just with the general concept, but also for a more sort of medieval fantasy D&D character like this, because to some degree I almost feel like this Galador piece here has... it kind of has that sort of more lizard dragon-like kind of scaled look to it, but it also kind of seems to represent like old sort of medieval or like fantasy style armor to some degree. So I think some of the textures on here are really working to the advantage of what this mock is trying to embody. So that's also something else to think about too. When you pick up your pieces, what sort of textures are on there, and how do they look? What sort of shapes and styles do they have? And can that to some degree or somehow influence the aesthetic that you're going for, Sure, sometimes you can kind of just throw a piece on a mock and it works texturally or it just looks nice, but if you can really specifically choose the pieces you put and make sure that, every little thing you put on there has a purpose, it can really, you can play, if you play your cards right, you can really effectively communicate stuff and it just looks cool. So some very clever texture play there. I love the weapon on this mock as well. This really awesome, very large mace. The top of this, so it uses some of those octagonal system pieces here, and there's all these Exoforce robot arms kind of linking it together, and then it's feeding flex tube through them, and attached to that flex tube is a whole bunch of teeth and other cone pieces to kind of represent all the different spikes that you might see on a mace there. As awesome, man. That's a really, really nice mace design there. Very unique weapon, and it really adds a lot of character to this mock, which a good weapon can always do. So some great stuff here, and a really cool color scheme too. The gold, dark green, and black. It's cool. Again, it has that very strong, like fantasy look to it. It's nice. There's some really, really cool stuff going on here, and a very interesting take on a dragon, and a different way that you could approach it than just, your typical dragon. But speaking of a typical dragon, this is a mock by Ray, and it's called Moondragon. So this more or less is kind of one of the few examples of a more typical dragon in this episode. But, when you say a typical dragon, you might think of like the dragons you see in Game of Thrones, which are more sort of wyvern in style. Or, typical dragons you might see, which, have the legs, have arms, and then wings on their backs. Just, very stereotypical, fairy tale story, medieval fantasy dragon that you might see. But, always remember that through all sorts of different mythology and stories and legends and tales, there's a lot of different interpretations of dragons. This is, of course, to my knowledge, a little bit more inspired by an Oriental-style dragon that has a very sort of longer, more curved body design. So always remember that take a look at legend and myth and stories. There's all sorts of different stories out there that have dragons in them. And pay attention to how those dragons look. There are a whole bunch of different interpretations, so make sure you study up and have a look at all sorts of things and see what could inspire you on it. So, yes, this is a more stereotypical dragon, but, it's not the stereotypical dragon from a certain point of view. Anyway, some great stuff going on this one here. I love the head design here. I especially love the little blue claw piece on the chin there, how it kind of looks like this little whisker, or almost sort of like a little beard or something. It's a very fun detail, and it's one of the things that I love seeing on mocks. Those little tiny itty-bitty things you didn't even need to put on, but the fact you did just ties it together, looks so nice, and is just a fun little detail that just ties everything together. It's beautiful. It's such a nice little addition there. And if you can find little stuff like that on your mock, it's not always easy to do. Sometimes that little stuff doesn't always come naturally, or you got to have a little bit of thought and planning to come up with that sort of stuff. But if you can put little details like that on a mock, it's always nice. And this is a really nice example of that, of how it just really makes this pop. The horns on the back of this mock too, using some of those tail pieces. You saw a few of them, I believe, in that color specifically on one of the Paraka Bionicle system play sets. I believe it was the Paraka Stronghold was the set there. They also come in a whole bunch of other different sets and of other colors and things. They're a really awesome element, those sort of curved tail or like horn pieces. And they're being used here as the horns there. I love that they're silver, really pops up against the rest of the color scheme here. It's very nice. It's a really cool head design overall. The kind of curvature to this body design is also beautiful. All throughout this mock uses a great blend of CCBS and Bionicle pieces. It's just really cool to see. I especially love that Molly here has used the Visorak headpiece there as kind of like the kind of back thigh here. Visorak pieces are kind of a bit of a pain to use. They're just a very large, kind of cumbersome piece, honestly, and it's great seeing it being used so effectively on this mock here. It really has a beautiful shape to it here, and it very much represents a leg design here. It's really cool. Additionally, too, something I like, and I'm sure there'll be builders out there who will wag their fingers, but I will have no finger wagging here. I love that Molly has used a bunch of rubber bands here on this mock. You can see some specifically on the front legs on this dragon, and you can also see some on the torso as well. So certain pieces are being held together here just through the friction of a good old rubber band. And I like it. I love it. You know what? Who says you need to actually connect pieces? If you can just attach them with a rubber band, but it looks nice, why not? Why not do it? And like I said, there'll be those purists out there who are like, but you have to connect it. And yeah, sure, it's nice to connect stuff, but sometimes it's also nice to just try new stuff or come up with some interesting connections that wouldn't otherwise work, but hey, with a rubber band, it does. Sometimes it's nice to try that sort of stuff, so why not give it a go? And I think this is a brilliant example of how that can look really ace. So nice work, Molly Ray. Good job. Gonna move on to the next mock here, and this is kind of sort of by Ryan McNaught, but also kind of not, because it's actually by Mark. Does Mark have a last name on this post? No, just Mark. Okay. Well, I had the pleasure of actually seeing this in person at Brickvention, and it was one of my favorite mocks at Brickvention. Absolutely stellar, gorgeous mock. And a little fun story behind this. This is also in the Flickr description here, but I don't necessarily need to read it word for word because I just know it. Ryan McNaught, of course, is one of the few LEGO certified professionals. If you watch LEGO Masters Australia, he's the judge on it. And he has a team, of course, that build LEGO for him, for his company and stuff like that. And essentially Ryan was telling me in person that he just said to his team, hey, you've got 2 weeks, I'm going to pay you in those 2 weeks, build whatever you want. And Mark, on his team here, he said, I'm going to build a dragon. And he built a very cool dragon. One of the coolest I've ever seen, and so I had to put it on here. I know this is a Bionicle Inspiration series, there's probably no Bionicle on this, but there's so much we can learn about shaping and just the organic shapes and textures on this mock, because honestly, it's beautiful. So let's take a deep dive into this beautiful dragon here. So right off the bat, we can see some custom cloth pieces being used here. Of course, those sort of dark tan cloth pieces there are not official, but that's okay, man, because it works, and you get some very nice wing design here with, that's the thing. If you want to build a larger wing design, or you have a really intricate wing design that you've come up with, and none of the official Lego cloth elements work, there's nothing wrong with going a bit custom with it. I mean, why not? As we can see here, it works well, and it's nice too that it can be in dark tan and kind of ties in with the color scheme. And speaking of the color scheme too, what I love about this mock is, obviously it's primarily that beautiful dark red, but then the transition, how the underbelly is dark tan like that, but then kind of tying the two together is that sort of strip of brown. And so it almost has this slight transition from the dark red into the brown into the dark tan. It's not, the most perfect, seamless transition, but those colors are very close to each other on the color wheel, and given the more limited Lego color palette that we have, they may as well be a pretty smooth, organic transition into one or the other, because dark tan and brown, or reddish brown for that matter, they're pretty close to each other. They blend very nicely together, and brown and dark tan are close enough as well. So it's a very nice kind of little color gradient that you've got going on there. So if you can do that, if you can find colors that are naturally very close to each other, whether that's like a green and a dark green that are, they're both a shade of green, but they're a little bit different, Or if it's something like that, where brown and dark tan, they're not necessarily colors that are all that close to each other, but there's little shades of brown within that dark tan. And, if you were to move up the hue and saturation and all that sort of stuff, you would get eventually from that brown to the dark tan and vice versa. So if you can find colors like that, that sort of a bit close to each other, if you were to kind of lay out a whole rainbow of bricks and sort of order them in, the light into the dark colors, if you can kind of play within those colors with a color scheme, you can accomplish some really cool stuff. I think it's a beautiful example of how wonderful that can look. Something else I love so much about this mock is just how seamless everything flows into each other. Some of these close-up shots of this, just the insane shaping that he's managed to accomplish with some of these system pieces here, using a whole bunch of kind of curved slopes and other interesting, intricate slopes and tiles and different things here. It looks so organic and so beautiful, and obviously, of course, a lot of that comes down to just lots of trial and error, just playing around with all those different types of pieces until it looks right. And, I know that he said he had 2 weeks to build this, and, that's not a huge amount of time. But, of course, these guys are professionals. It's their job to play and build with Lego. So with lots of trial and error and practice and stuff, it becomes a little bit more second nature to achieve such beautiful shaping and just flow within the mock. All the limbs on this mock just seamlessly flow into the torso. The beautiful head design here flows so nicely into the neck. And this tail design here, you can almost barely see the gaps in between the individual segments on the tail there. It looks like just one seamless flowing tail. It's just gorgeous. I could go on and on about this mock, man. It's just fantastic. The system diorama around it too is a fantastic addition. I love how these rocks are kind of just, kind of poking out in some other different directions. Of course, if you're building a Bionicle mock, nothing wrong with building a little base around it like this. And hey, if you want to play around with some lighting as well, whether it's official Lego lighting or not, you could even do, having your dragon throwing up's definitely the wrong word, having your dragon breathing fire on a helpless little Lego knight there. And you can put some lights in there as well, and it'll really, really pop. So, fantastic. I'm going to stop talking about this mock now because I could probably go a whole episode just talking about this one here, but it's absolutely fantastic. Mark, you did a good job. Ryan, you did an even better job hiring Mark. Good job. Anyway, back to Bionicle. But see, there was a lot we learnt there, wasn't there, that relates to Bionicle. Anyway, this mock is by Striker5260, and it's called Crystal V1.5. And that's cool, I didn't read the description before. He says, credit to BioRays for the head design, and Elira, or Elira, I can never pronounce Elira. Every time I've said it, people are like, you said it wrong. And I'm like, how do you say it? Credit to Molly Ray, for the foot design. So it's cool, isn't it? The fact that certain AFOLs, mockists, TFOLs, whatever you want to call them, have come up with a cool, specific design, and other builders gone, that's cool. I'm going to put that into my mock, and maybe change it up a little bit, put it in some different circumstances and see how it works. But then, of course, when it's posted, you say, hey, got to give credit where credit is due. I was inspired by these specific people. That's awesome, man. It's a nice sort of community spirit, of course, giving and sharing different techniques and playing around with it, expanding it, seeing the different ways you can take it. Never forget that you can do that because it's a powerful tool. Anyway, another example of a humanoid dragon mock here. This one's very different from the Dragonborn mock we were seeing before, which is fantastic. It's got a very cool weapon here using some of those Borok shield elements to kind of form the tips there of the hammer design. That's just great use of those pieces for sure. But yeah, going on to the head design here, I love how he's used some of these specific pieces. I've always just called them connector pieces in the past, but this is their more or less official name on Bricklink. It is Technic, Axle, and Pin Connector angled number 5, and the specific degree that it's at, which is slightly irrelevant because there are a whole bunch of different variations on these pieces. Of course, each one of them are numbered. This one was number 5, the one I'm specifically showing you, but there's obviously all the different series of numbers, and the number indicates the specific angle that the connector piece is at. Of course, they can go from 180 degrees and tilt down in other directions as well. And they're such a very helpful piece. We can see them being used in 2 ways here on this mock. So, for example, we see them being used on the horn design, sort of at the top of their head here. They're kind of forming some beautiful silver horns. And then we take a look at the mouth design here. We can see more of them being used. And I would say these are a different angle or number to those connector pieces. And they're kind of forming the snout of the dragon. There's little teeth coming out of it too. Great way of using 2 of those pieces. Really, really nice. And they're almost kind of the crux to this head design too. They're kind of the sort of major pieces being used there. So really, really nice head design. And it looks very draconic, very sort of more reptilian in nature, which of course is what you want if you're building a dragon mock, isn't it? So, hey, if you're planning on building a dragon mock, maybe those pieces might be of use to you, whether they're for horns or for a snout or any other part of the body. Heck, you could even use them on the wings. Great piece. And overall, this is a really cool mock too. Lots of great stuff going on. Love that more humanoid look to a dragon. Just looks really nice. Let's move on to another humanoid dragon mock. And this one is called Raymanu, King of Dragons. And this is by the Lightning Lynx. So I like specifically that he's used a lot of the invasion from below pieces on this mock, I never would have thought that specific kind of more kaiju-esque head that you saw on basically every single monster from the invasion below sets. I never thought that would work so well as a more draconic head, but we see it here, and it kind of does work really well. It's pretty cool. Of course, this mock sort of shares a whole bunch of pieces from invasion below sets. Nothing wrong with doing that, of course. Maybe you really love that wave of Hero Factory, or your collection just happens to have a lot of them. Nothing wrong with using a bunch of those pieces for a dragon mock like this. Also has a bit of a shared color scheme with some of the sets in there, of course. The gold, the trans blue, and the black. And it looks nice. It has a slight regalness and royalty look to it, which is cool. What I also love so much is, like the name of this mock said, he is the King of Dragons. And, of course, you think of a king, you think he might have a crown. And this guy, he has those sort of green and black quasar spikes coming out of his head. Not really a crown, but, he has this sort of gold, very ornate-looking armor with these spikes coming out and stuff. I actually kind of like that. I like the idea that he doesn't have a crown because he's a dragon. Like, why does he need a crown? But instead he has more ornate armor, and the armor is gold, which sort of course, evokes a sense of royalty. Which is cool, isn't it? I love that idea. If you are building a king, maybe you yourself could do something similar. You don't want to build a crown. You're happy with the mask design it's got currently, or the head design you've made, and you didn't think about a crown, or you can't come up with a crown design. Well, maybe you could do something a bit different. Maybe he has, like this, more ornate armor that suggests that he's a king. Or maybe he wears a cape, which suggests he's a king, Especially if you're playing around with your own storyline. You could change the lore on what it means to be a king. Do they need a crown at all? I love that idea. Another thing I love too about this mock is the kind of trophies that he's got. You can see in his hand in these a few of these images here, he has a whole bunch of different masks hanging on a chain. I love that. It's the idea that maybe he's slain a bunch of different Toa or heroes out in there, and he's taken their masks and now he has them on his chain, and he stares at them thinking of his victories. That's really kind of cool. It's sinister. It's an interesting sort of little plot point for a story or something. It's cool. I like it. A couple other pictures here too of the frame of this mock. So hey, if you really like this guy, you think, I want to build something like this. Here's how he's done it. He's taken all the armor off. You can see him naked. That's right, it's one of those episodes. Now you can study the frame. So that's always something you can do, Study these pictures, take a look at how this frame is built, go a little bit of a deeper dive, maybe time to pause the video and zoom in a little bit, maybe give a bit of a screenshot so you can really zoom in. Study how the frame's done, and then from there you can armor up the frame yourself, and you have something to work off. A good sort of starting point, a good base for the mock. That's pretty cool. So a really nice King of Dragons here. On to the next mock. and this is by Aporu, Defender of Rahi. And this mock is called Valstrax, the Red Comet. So of course this again is a little bit more of your typical dragon that you might see. But what I love so much about it is the way the wing design is designed. You've got all these kind of flames coming out of the different tips. And, typically like you see on a dragon, the wings are kind of more almost like skin-like. Like we were seeing on the brick-built dragon that Mark/Ryan had built, the dark red one that we saw before. The cloth element almost sort of represented... like you might see on a bat, a more sort of flesh-like wing design. Whereas here, it doesn't have that. It kind of almost looks a little bit more robotic or mechanical to some degree. And I like that idea. So I think this is a little bit more, to some degree, of course, an interesting representation of a dragon. It's a more mechanical version. So, maybe it's powered by something else and it sort of produces these flames, and maybe they're like engines or something. So when it flies, it's less of a flapping motion and more of being propelled by rockets or engines. I kind of like that idea. I don't know, that's the kind of look that I was getting from looking at these wings. That may not be his original purpose, but I still like that idea of a more mechanical dragon that has certain design changes and different aesthetics to it. It's unique and it's really cool. Great head design on this mock too, using the Skrull shield there as sort of just the top bit of the head design there. Looks very nice. And a whole bunch of different CCBS pieces being used here as well. CCBS pieces, of course, very helpful for tails and limbs and things like that. And be sure to look into your CCBS stuff if you are building a dragon, because it's going to help you out, that's for sure. Of course, that being said, your typical Bionicle pieces will help you too, but CCBS is, it is the character creature build system, of course. So it will be helpful for building those creatures. So there you go. A really awesome, more mechanical style dragon, or at least from my perspective, it was a more mechanical style dragon, but a really cool mock regardless of what the actual purpose of it was. Some great stuff going on. On to the final mock now. This mock is by Ziontro and is called Dragon Toad. And I really like this one. I love the idea of taking aspects of dragons, but branching it off in a different direction, This is a dragon toad. It's combining all the good aspects of dragons and all the good aspects of toads and putting them together as one mock. That's fun. That's cool. What other sort of stuff could you do that with? Could you mash up a dragon and a bunny rabbit, or all sorts of different possibilities? That's a fun idea and a great way of taking it. I also like that this mock kind of almost has this slight gut, using that blue Hero Factory torso piece there. It almost does. Looks like he's got a little pot belly or something. It's fun. Even the posing he's in, he just looks a little bit more stout and almost lethargic. And I think a big part of that too is the printing on the head design here, using, again, that beautiful kaiju monster piece that you saw in the Invasion from Below sets. The printing around the eyes, he has this just kind of slight look to them that, at least to me, kind of gives him this slight lethargic look, or a little bit more of kind of, it almost looks like he's sighing, or he's just kind of like, not today, And I love that. It's a really great choice of the printing on that element there. And it's adding so much personality to this mock. It's great. Of course, combining that with the overall structure and frame and look of this mock too, everything's working together in some great ways here. It's just a really fun, really cute mock. Also a really fun tongue design here, and just in general, the way he's built that mouth design is fantastic. Some really, really nice stuff going on here, that's for sure. So there you go. That's been a whole bunch of different dragon mocks today. Hopefully, if you're planning on building a dragon mock, we've inspired you a little bit, or if you're not planning on building a dragon mock, maybe now you can. Or maybe some of these principles and things we've explored might help you in the other random things you're building. And if they have, be sure to let me know. Always love hearing when the inspiration hits and you're building something cool. Be sure to show it to me. I'd love to see it. And if you do want to show it to me, there are links in my description below on the, if you head on down a little bit further down at this video here, read the description. You can see links to my social media, places like the Discord server, my Instagram, Flickr, Facebook. Be sure to shoot me a message if you have made some cool stuff. And, let me know your process, the things you went through there. Would love to hear it. Would love to see what you've made. Additionally, you can check out some of my stuff on my social media as well. Got lots of different things going on there. Additionally, too, in the description, you can find links to the mocks you saw in today's episode. Be sure to give those guys a follow, a like, and some love, because, man, they've built some fantastic stuff, and it's worth checking out the other things they've made. Additionally, if you want to submit your mocks to the show, maybe you liked this one, you thought, I want to see my own stuff in this episode, you can. You can do so through the email you're currently seeing on your screen. You can submit your own stuff to that, include as many or as little pictures or as much or as little of a description as you'd like, and then it'll be put on the list, and one day it'll appear on the show. But of course, we've got a lot of submissions to work through, so of course, remember, patience is key. But I do my best to put as many submissions as I can into an episode, so stay tuned. Anyway, that's it, guys. Hope you enjoyed episode 151. I don't know, I'm recording these ahead of time. I forget if this was 151. It is! Hope you enjoyed episode 151 of the Bionicle Inspiration Series. Thanks, guys. See you in the next one.